All right, so we'll go ahead and get started here. I'm going to read Exodus 15. As we begin, you'll remember the Exodus 15 is called the Song at the Sea, and it is the song that was sung in the immediate aftermath of the deliverance at the Red Sea. So this is the song of praise to God that was given as a result of the most climactic salvation of the Old Testament. This is the way in which the people of God responded. So Exodus 15, then Moses and the people of Israel sang this song to the Lord, saying, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his hosts he cast into the sea, and his chosen officers were sunk in the Red Sea. The floods covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you overthrow your adversaries. You send out your fury. It consumes them like stubble. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The floods stood up in a heap. The deeps congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill of them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. You blew with your wind. The sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders? You stretched out your hand. The earth swallowed them. You have led in your steadfast love the people whom you have redeemed. You have guided them by your strength to your holy abode. The peoples have heard. They tremble. Pangs have seized the inhabitants of Philistia. Now are the chiefs of Edom dismayed. Trembling seizes the leaders of Moab. All the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. Terror and dread fall upon them because of the greatness of your arm. They are still as a stone, till your people, O Lord, pass by, till the people pass by whom you have purchased. You will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain, the place, O Lord, which you have made for your abode. And the reason this is important is because in the Davidic covenant, we are told that the son of David will build the house of God. So, what would those readers have expected on the basis of that prophecy? Would they have thought, the temple must be it when they see the temple go up? Or was there already a greater expectation that had already been laid for the house of God? That's the question that we're asking. And basically what I'm arguing is that if Moses himself has already given an expectation for the house of God that goes far beyond what the temple could fulfill, and even we could say that the temple is inherently not filling up that expectation, then it would stand to reason then that we would expect there to be a son of David who would build a better house of God than the temple. That's the idea. So we had looked at this, what Moses has said, particularly about the Messiah as king. It was kind of the same kind of argument. If there was already this very strong expectation that there would be a Messiah who would be a great king, and if the Davidic covenant is building on that, we would say, well, the Davidic covenant must be about the Messiah. But then the same thing can be said with regard to the house of God. If the expectation for the house of God is already pointing to a new creation, then it would stand to reason that you'd expect the great fulfillment of the building of the house of God to be nothing less than a new creation. So we looked last week at the tabernacle. And this is, again, not an obscure place in the Pentateuch. You could even say this is like the main thing that is said from Exodus 19 all the way to Numbers 10. So you've got, the back half of Exodus, like more than half of Exodus is about what happens at Sinai, and that material is dominated by the building of the tabernacle, the instructions in the building. You've got Leviticus, the sacrifices that are to be given in the tabernacle. You've got Numbers, the setting up of the camp around the tabernacle. All of this material is dominated by the tabernacle. And therefore, if the tabernacle itself is pointing to something beyond this creation, we would say that is like the fundamental idea for the house of God. So this is what we looked at last week. And we saw that one of the things that's actually not contested by anybody is that the tabernacle is a picture of heaven. that there's some kind of connection with heaven or even all of creation. It's like a mini picture of creation ultimately with God's presence being in the Holy of Holies, which is a picture of heaven itself. Now, the thing though where scholars will sometimes stop is they'll say, okay, they'll even say there's a link to creation, even heaven itself, not even just in Israel, but even all the pagan temples had the same connections. This is even a point of continuity with the pagan temples as well. It's to say everybody recognized that in some way there is this connection between God and a temple as a picture of heaven where God actually dwells. But in order for it to be eschatological, now that word just means, pointing to a new creation, pointing to the end times, pointing to this like final climactic salvation. There has to be some way in which we're not just thinking about the tabernacle corresponding to heaven, but also pointing to something of a renewal where we'll be with God sometime in the future. And this is, in fact, what we see. If you just think about what is happening in the tabernacle, if everything stands for creation, if everything's symbolic of this, or even the Garden of Eden, we looked at, how the tabernacle looks like this great garden. It replaces the mountain of God where Eden was, all these kinds of things. But then notice, you don't just do nothing in this temple. You offer sacrifices, and it's by sacrifices that you can approach God. And the greater the atonement, so to speak, the closer you get to God. Such that in Leviticus 16 then, the high priest, once a year, is able to go actually all the way into the presence of God, to go through the veil, embroidered with cherubim, who guard the way back into fellowship with God, just as in Genesis 3. So, what is then the picture of the tabernacle? It's not just of creation. It's actually of the restoration of fellowship between God and man. So, and where is that restoration of fellowship going to take place? Well, in heaven, or the thing that looks like Eden. That's the basic message of the tabernacle. And so if you were to give like a one sentence explanation, someone to say, hey, there's so much about the tabernacle in the Pentateuch. Moses seems to spend so much time. Why? What is the meaning? What's the purpose? What's the significance of this theology of the tabernacle? In one simple sentence, it could be, well, it's teaching us that fellowship with God will be restored for man through blood sacrifice. That's the point. Which means that it's not just pointing to a correspondence with heaven, but it is actually how man can be restored to heaven itself. Which means it is actually eschatological. So let's say then that you had just the Pentateuch, and you're seeing all these things. You're reading in Genesis 3, okay, that man is exiled from the presence of God. He doesn't have access to the tree of life. He's separated from God. And then the main thing you're reading about is that there's this house of God that looks an awful lot like Eden. And if you offer these sacrifices, you'll be able to get back into the presence of God. However, the people of God actually never receive that ultimate benefit through the tabernacle. That is to say, the high priest gets to do it once a year. He doesn't get to do it permanently. What we would say then is that we would know that the thing to which the tabernacle points is fulfilled when man is actually restored to the fellowship of God through some kind of sacrifice, which you could say God himself will provide, as is said in Genesis chapter 22. God will provide some kind of sacrifice wherein there will be an actual restoration of fellowship with God. So if there is something that is built that doesn't actually give you that, we would say, no matter what it is, we're still waiting for the fulfillment of what the tabernacle was pointing to. Because we would know that it's actually fulfilled when all of creation is renewed and man is in the presence of God once again. Because that is symbolically what is happening in the tabernacle. And everything in the tabernacle is in fact symbolic. Does that make sense? Are there any questions on that? Yeah.
I understand how the sacrifices point to man's restoration. I've always thought of it like it reflects the heavenly reality.
Yeah.
All those things like the tongs on the altar in Isaiah 6. But I don't understand. So do they point also? You're saying to a new creation? Then why is there an altar?
Yeah, the altar is in the courtyard. You sacrifice the animal on the altar, and then that allows you to go into the presence of God deeper in where there are no altars.
Are you saying it points also to the new heavens?
Yeah, it does, in the sense that it's pointing to the picture of how redemption will be accomplished such that the new creation is established. So it's not to say like, yeah, I think the point you're getting at is something like, if it's pointing to a new creation, why is there an altar insofar as there won't be an altar in the new creation? The point I'm making is that fundamentally, the house is saying you can only get to the new creation through blood sacrifice. So that's the idea. It is pointing to that movement, that there will be an establishment of a new creation wherein man will be restored to the fellowship of God through a sacrifice of blood. But the point is that it's got that forward-looking element. If there is a sacrifice, it doesn't actually produce a new creation wherein man has fellowship with God. With just the Pentateuch, you'd be able to see, I think, pretty clearly that it's not the thing that is ultimately promised. So that was the point. So like if there's like the temple is like the tabernacle, it doesn't actually give the thing promised. Therefore, it can't be the final fulfillment. Moses has already taught us. I would say the temple itself points beyond itself as well because it's the same theology. All of the Bible is centered around the question, how can man be restored to the fellowship of God? That's what happens in Genesis 3. There is this exile from the presence of God. Then the tabernacle is given by God himself as a kind of picture lesson to show the people of God how it's going to happen. So we're expecting some kind of resolution of this tension that man has been separated from God. And then the tabernacle is the picture of how that restoration can happen, which means that, again, the ultimate fulfillment must be the actual restoration of fellowship with God. It must be. All right, yeah, Ben.
It may sound kind of funny, but like, you tend to put a lot of significance into the tabernacle and into our tabernacle, but it's the kind of concept that it's really not the tabernacle, but it's the symbolism and
Yeah.
restoration delivered. Like, don't focus on the building itself, or don't focus on the tent, or don't focus on,
Yeah.
but focus on what all this means.
Yeah, I think what it means is the key. I think the point I was making last week too is that's very clearly like if you were focusing on it intently and correctly, the thing you would immediately be struck with is that everything seems to be symbolic. And I think that is something that is just very clear from the description itself. And then so if you're really thinking about it very carefully, you think, well, what is it symbolic of? And that would be the way to get at the meaning. And I do think, sometimes I get asked the question like, well, could they have seen this? Like, could they have understood these kinds of things? I think it actually would have been much easier for them to understand insofar as they would have actually seen it. So they're reading, say, Genesis 3, Genesis 2, the description of Eden, and then they're then seeing a tabernacle that is built to look just like it with the cherubim embroidered on the veil. It's like, that would have been pretty clear. It's like, oh, this is a lot like Eden. Maybe you and I could miss it. I think the other thing is we typically tend not to focus so much on Leviticus and Exodus and Numbers. So people say like, how could they see it? And it's because oftentimes we today will not. Just like skim over those parts of the Bible. But if that was what you had, and I would say too, we shouldn't just skim over it ourselves. And you were to just ask like basic questions of meaning. I just really do think this is the basic meaning. This is the fundamental idea that would have been grasped. And I would argue was grasped in a number of ways. We mentioned last week as well from Psalm 104 that creation is described like God pitching a tent. And the idea is like there is this, like that's, I would say, as the psalmist is clearly recognizing there's some connection between the tabernacle and creation. And, us pitching the tent is a lot like God pitching the tent of creation, so to speak, because the tabernacle is a picture of creation itself. All right, well, let's continue on. I want to move forward here. My goal was to get through, really the rest of the Pentateuch. There's 3 more passages I wanted to look at. I'm not sure if we'll be able to do that, but we'll give it a shot. We'll start with Exodus 15 here. And again, I would just point out here as we're going to Exodus 15, we are not dealing with obscure parts of the Pentateuch. This is the song that was sung to God immediately after the most climactic salvation of the entire Old Testament. So if this gives us an expectation for an eschatological house, and you're going to say, well, you have to search into the corners of the Pentateuch to find it, we'd say, well, we're not searching in the corners. We are searching in like the climactic places. And what we're noticing is that everywhere we look, there seems to be this Messianic king and this expectation for a house of God. So we saw this particularly with the center of the Pentateuch is centered on this house of God, and it's got an eschatological bent. And here we've got the song at the sea, and I'm going to be arguing that it's the same thing that we see here as well. Let me say as well, just in terms of the significance of the song at the sea, one Old Testament scholar who does really good work on the Pentateuch has noted that the way the Pentateuch as a whole is structured, that there seems to be this particular significance for those places in the Pentateuch that are the poetic sections. So there are certain poetic sections found throughout. There's 4 of them, and they kind of occur at what he calls the seams of the Pentateuch. So there's like these kind of major divisions where you're moving from one section to another. And at those major divisions, you see these poetic sections. They're climactic, always, and they have this like added significance. The first seam, so to speak, for the Pentateuch was Genesis 49. That was the poetic section where there's the blessings that Jacob gives to his sons, the blessings that will happen in the end of days. And it's there that we also see this very climactic messianic prophecy that there will be a son of Judah who will be like a lion, who will be a king and reign over all the earth. So there you've got, the first seam, so to speak, the first poetic section is going to be this messianic prophecy. This is the second one, coming again at a climactic point, immediately following the deliverance at the Red Sea. The next one is going to be the oracles of Balaam. That being significant is it's signaling the beginning of the conquest, the end of the wilderness wandering, the beginning of the taking of the promised land. All of that is being declared in the Balaam oracles, coming in Numbers 23 and 24. So that's, again, not an obscure part of the Pentateuch. We'd say structurally climactic, thematically climactic. It's just this is a high point. And then the last poetic section comes at the end of Deuteronomy. So just completing the whole thing. And we've already seen that in the Balaam oracles that there was 2 major messianic prophecies that came, predicting the Messiah coming as king. And we're actually going to see here as well, there's also one in the third oracle that's tied to the new creational language of a kind of restoration of Eden. So if you think about particularly the third oracle of Balaam, which again we only talked about the second part, and that was probably months ago. But the third Balaam oracle basically describes 2 things: Israel being like a new Eden with God, and a messianic king who will come. Those are the 2 things that are basically said in the third Balaam oracle. So again, very significant and climactic. But we'll focus here first on Exodus chapter 15. And the song here, clearly there's in the first part of the song is dealing with the destruction of Pharaoh and his armies in the Red Sea, of course. And you'll notice that there is this shift, particularly in verse 13, where there is a focus now on the taking of the promised land. And so one of the things that this shows us is that even from the very beginning, this is hopefully it's clear to you, but the point of the removal of the people of God from Egypt was for the sake of entering the promised land. So those 2 things can never be divided from one another. The point of the deliverance from the house of bondage is to bring the people of God into, as we'll see, the house of God in the promised land. So there was always this idea of being brought out in order to be brought in. And now that they're praising God here for being brought out and anticipating the significance of being brought in, so to speak. And you'll notice here that there is this description of the various nations who will hear about what has happened, and they're going to fear. It's the nations that are going to be dispossessed when the people of God come into the promised land. And then there are 2 verses in particular where there is a description of the people of God being brought into the promised land and the significance of this promised land for the restoration of fellowship with God. And the reason this is significant is because, again, the narrative tension of the entire Bible, and particularly established at the very beginning in Genesis, same author, Moses, is how can the people of God be restored to fellowship with him? Right? That is the narrative tension. That was the thing that was lost. And we would expect then the resolution to be that would be the thing that is restored then, being with God, having everlasting life in his presence. And it's significant then that in verses 13 and 17 we have this statement of the restoration of this fellowship. You have led in your steadfast love the people whom you have redeemed. So the redemption out of Egypt. You have guided them by your strength to your holy abode. So dwelling place. You're guiding them there. Where is the dwelling place? Well, we understand it's actually going to be in the promised land is the idea. Verse 17, you will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain, the place, O Lord, which you have made for your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established. The Lord will reign forever and ever. So God will bring the people of God into the promised land, but not just into the promised land in general, but then also to a particular mountain. So we're already thinking mountain of God theology, thinking Eden, thinking Sinai, those same things that we saw in the tabernacle. That's already related to this kind of restoration idea. God's going to bring the people of God into the promised land to a particular mountain, and on that mountain will be a place that God himself will establish, very significant, that God himself will establish as a sanctuary where he'll be with his people. My point is that's clearly a kind of restoration of what was lost in Eden. There's no hint in Exodus 15 that the fulfillment will be anything less than that kind of new creation. There's no hint of anything less than a return to Eden. Now, if it is the case, as it is the case, they go into the promised land, the temple's established, but then this kind of climactic idea is not fulfilled, what we would say is then, well, what that means is that the promised land is a type, and it's looking forward to that final restoration. The taking of the promised land is a picture of that final thing, because in the actual prophecy, there is a pointing forward to this kind of final reality. Now, let me just go into a little bit more detail about how we know that this is speaking about the more final reality. Two things to note, particularly about verse 17 in particular. You'll note that it is emphatically stated. I'm saying it's emphatically stated because it's said twice in just one verse, that it is the Lord himself who makes this house. It's the Lord himself who makes this house. Notice, you will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain, the place, O Lord, which you have made for your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established. So twice there it's stated, who is the one who makes this house? It is God himself who makes the house. Now, this is significant because we've already noted that the house that is made in the wilderness points to a new creation. It at least is symbolic of creation, right? And it's parallel to God making creation as one would pitch a tent, right? So there's this connection between the construction of the tabernacle and creation itself. And in the wilderness, the house that was established, so to speak, the tent, was established with human hands. This one, though, is said to be established by the hands of God. And if we were to ask, well, when did God, is there anything we know about God's establishing houses wherein he can dwell with his people when he does it with his own hands? Is there anything we know from the Bible about that? Well, the answer is that that's creation. That's what Eden was. That is what we see in Genesis 1 and 2. You could say then the first tent God pitched, in Psalm 104, was the first creation. Now we're being told that God's going to do it again. We would anticipate that would be nothing less than a new creation. Now, what's significant further about this is that this idea of a temple that is made with the hands of God, by the hands of God himself, ends up becoming a theme that we see throughout the entire Bible that always is related to new creation. So it would be like a way that you know that the new creation hasn't come. It's because it's a temple made with human hands. And the temple that we're really looking for is that one which is made without human hands. So for instance, this is would be the significance. So just go to a few places. Here, 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 27. And we often think about this as speaking about the transcendence of God, which it obviously is. This verse is obviously speaking about the transcendence of God. But it's significant that in 1 Kings 8:27, it's coming in the context of the construction of another house and even the temple. Okay? So what do we think about temples made with human hands? Or what does Solomon think about it? He says, but will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest of heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house that I have built? So here there's this idea, I've built a temple, it's made with human hands. What is Solomon saying? This is the dedication of the temple. The first thing he's saying is, as well, my temple built with human hands cannot actually house God, of course, because even the heaven of heavens cannot contain him. So if we were to say, well, there will be a house of God which will contain God, we would say it's got to be better than the heaven of heavens. That would be the only implication that we could draw. You think of the rest of this too. I mean, this theme of 1 Kings 8:27, that God cannot actually dwell in the temple in a kind of ultimate sense. And the reason is because it's a temple made with human hands. But again, the Exodus 15 is telling us there's going to be a temple made without human hands. Becomes the kind of theological foundation for the entire prayer that Solomon gives. He says, your people will sin against you, and then they're going to pray in connection with this house that I built, the one built with human hands. And when they do that, they're coming into this temple built with human hands, but it's not where you dwell. Then you hear from heaven, your actual dwelling place. So you actually dwell in heaven, and then forgive them. Or, when the Gentiles come from a long way off and they come to praise your name, they bow down to this house and hear from heaven their prayer. This is said like 5 or 6 times and all these different things. But in every case, the structure is, God, you actually dwell in heaven, not in this temple, not in an ultimate sense. So there is a sense in which the glory fills the temple, of course, but Solomon's recognizing that it's not in an ultimate sense. And the idea is that when this happens, the people of God are to look to God who's in heaven, and Solomon is calling upon God to actually respond from heaven and then to answer from heaven. The point is that Solomon seems to be recognizing that his temple is not actually the fulfillment of what has already been promised. It can't actually be the fulfillment of Exodus chapter 15. In fact, it is significant as well in this prayer that Solomon gives, there is actually a reference to and actually a quotation of Exodus 15. The language of the place where God dwells is like verbatim in the Hebrew early on, a quotation of Exodus 15. So he's saying this is like what we have in Exodus 15, but then immediately then backs away in chapter 8, verse 27 of 1 Kings. And will then say, but not in this way, not in this way, not in this way, not in this way. So the idea is that there is some relationship that the temple does bear to this final reality, but the temple is not that final reality itself. On what grounds can we say that it's not that final reality? It's a temple built with human hands. And in Exodus 15, it is emphatically stated that God will actually build one with his own hands. So just to show other places as well where this is given, you think of Isaiah chapter 66, verses 1 and 2, the same kind of idea is stated. Thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. What is the house that you would build for me? And what is the place for my rest? It's like, the idea is, obviously a rhetorical question. There is no place you could build for me. There's no house that you could actually build. Why is that the case? All these things my hand has made. I've made all of creation. How then could you build a house for me that I could dwell in? Then the point is that God does not actually dwell in an ultimate sense in temples made with human hands. Right? It cannot be done. All these things my hands have made, and so all these things came to be, declares the Lord. The fact that God is the creator of all things means that man cannot actually build that house that contains God. You think of even further, just to point to this kind of end-time reality. In Daniel chapter 2, we have a similar thing where, and this is specifically said to be a dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. You remember this is Daniel telling Nebuchadnezzar's dream and interpreting it for him. There is the statue with all the different parts. And Daniel specifically says to Nebuchadnezzar, God is showing you the things that will happen in the end of days. That phrase is used, in the end of days. And what happens to that statue? There is a stone that is cut without human hands. No human hands. It comes and crushes the statue and then grows into a great mountain, the mountain of God, the mountain of God where there is going to be the temple. So now there is this no human hands thing that we see again. And this is the reason why then, if you come to the New Testament, the idea of new creation being a thing that comes about by God acting without human hands, or made without hands, that becomes a kind of technical phrase to describe the new creation. So, for instance, in Hebrews chapter 9, there is this the description of the tent, and what is said is, Christ goes into the true tent, the tent of the new creation. Like it even says, which is a new creation. But how is that tent described? He goes into the tent, the true tent in heaven, the one that is not made with hands, the one that is made without hands. That is the new creation. So the thing that God makes, this is in Hebrews chapter 9 if you want to look it up, but in the construction of the tabernacle without hands is in fact the new creation. And what does it mean that it's going to be without hands? It's not going to be with human hands, it's going to be by God himself. And this is the point then that Stephen is making in Acts chapter 7 as well, when he's going to be stoned. The people are looking to the temple. They're upset with Christians for not seeing the significance of the physical structure of the temple. And he says, don't you know that God does not dwell in houses, in temples made with human hands? He does not dwell in temples made with human hands. Why? Because the temple is itself pointing to a creation that will be constructed by God himself without human hands. So God is going to be the one to do it. And if we were to have a temple that was built with human hands, we'd say, well, that would be evidence that it's not actually the final thing. And notice then, I would argue that all these other texts are going to bring us into this land, bring us to the mountain, and then you're going to bring us into that house that your own hands will build. Not our hands, your hands. And that's when we'll be with you forever. That's the expectation, I would say, of what the people of God are going to receive. Now, if that's the case, would we not say that the house of God in the Davidic covenant would be building on that theme as well? And in fact, and we'll go into this a little bit more in weeks to come as we look at the Davidic covenant and its interpretation more directly, but if you're ever wondering why it is in the beginning of the Davidic covenant that God says, ever since the day I brought you out of Egypt, through all the days of the judges, all those things, I never commanded a house of cedar to be built. Why? Because a house of cedar is built with human hands. It's built with human hands. Solomon then builds a house of cedar. Now, I'm not saying that Solomon, we'll get into how Solomon relates. I'm not saying it was sinful for him to do this. It was right for him to do it, and also to recognize, as he did, that this house is not the climactic fulfillment. How can it be? Even the highest of heavens cannot contain you. So the point is that there is already this expectation in the Davidic covenant itself. Okay, there's going to be a house that's built, but just know, before even this prophecy of the building of this house is given, I've never actually commanded a house to be built of cedar. Right? I've not commanded a house to be built with human hands. What then is the house that the son of David will build? I would say it's the one from Exodus 15. It's the one that Solomon says was not his own. It'd be the one that would be the fulfillment of what is stated in Daniel chapter 2. I would say Daniel 7 is making it clear that the Son of Man is going to be connected with the establishment of this mountain. All those things, I would say, are just inherently what we're to recognize. If the Son of David must therefore have, it's the reason for the title of my dissertation, an everlasting kingdom. He must have a kingdom that lasts forever, and an eschatological house. He is the one with the everlasting kingdom, and he's the one who builds the eschatological house, which is in fact the new creation. Now, we don't have a lot of time, and there's one more thing I want to say about Exodus 15, so this will probably have to bring us to the end here. But notice as well, one other thing that's significant about Exodus 15 is notice the language of what comes immediately before the building of the house of God, which God is said to do with his own hands. The statement immediately before that is, you will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain. So here, God himself taking the people of God, planting them on the mountain. When was the last time? You'd say further, there's the same kind of idea of like direct agency, right? God's going to do it. God brings them in. God's the one that plants them. When's the last time God planted something on a mountain? That there is this, the expectation of the people of God when they came out of Egypt was that the ultimate thing they were looking for was in fact the new creation. Well, what I'm saying is like that's the thing they were expecting on the basis of Exodus chapter 15. They were looking. You could say this maybe would help answer too the question of, could they have known this? I'm arguing that Exodus 15 is just showing that they did know it because that's what they were singing about. But you'll notice how is it that the New Testament writers seem to ascribe so much knowledge to the Old Testament saints? Abraham, knew my day, saw my day, and rejoiced in it. So Abraham knew of Christ. That's the idea. And there's been lots of arguments I've given for how that could be the case. But you think of that. You think of in Hebrews chapter 11. Stated over and over again, but you think of in Hebrews chapter 11 particularly that they were looking for that better country,